Have you ever wondered why, despite the billions of dollars poured into senior wellness every year, the hallways of our nursing homes are more crowded than they have ever been in human history? I am Dr. Sanjay Gupta, and as I sit here in my office in Atlanta, looking out at the sun setting over the Georgia pines, I find myself thinking about the 30,000 faces I have touched over 3 decades of orthopedic surgery. 30,000 stories of fathers, grandmothers, and lifelong friends whose bodies eventually became prisons. My hands have felt the brittle texture of bones that lost their battle with gravity, and my ears have heard the silent, crushing heartbreak of a 75-year-old realizing they can no longer stand unassisted.
I have spent my life in the sterilized theater of the operating room, repairing the damage that time and neglect have wrought, but today I am stepping out from behind the scalpel to tell you something that makes my colleagues in the boardroom very uncomfortable. For years, a massive, faceless machine, a trillion-dollar health industry, has been whispering a seductive, comfortable lie into your ear. They have told you that after you reach the milestone of 75, a simple, gentle walk is all you need to stay healthy. It sounds so reasonable, doesn't it? It is easy, it is free, and it feels productive. But as a surgeon who has seen the internal architecture of the human body more times than I can count, I am here to tell you that walking after 75 is simply not enough. In fact, relying solely on walking is like trying to hold up a collapsing house with nothing but a coat of fresh paint. The wellness market hates when I say this because their entire profit model depends on your slow, inevitable decline. They want you to stay in that safe zone of walking because it keeps you dependent on their high-profit orthotics, their expensive mobility aids, their endless bottles of joint supplements, and those overpriced senior fitness gadgets that promise the world but deliver so little. Let us look at the cold, hard numbers that these corporations try to bury under layers of glossy marketing. The global walking industry alone, comprised of specialized shoes, digital trackers, orthopedic insoles, and stabilizers, pulls in over $1.3 trillion annually. It is a financial empire built on the movement of seniors. They absolutely do not want you to learn that walking, as rhythmic and pleasant as it may be, leaves nearly 40% of the muscles responsible for your balance, your stability, and your protection against fatal falls completely untrained. These are the deep stabilizers, the hidden guardians of your skeleton that walking never reaches, no matter how many miles you log on your pedometer. I remember a patient of mine, a man whose dignity was as sharp as his suit, who told me with tears in his eyes that he had walked 5 miles a day every day of his life, only to find himself unable to get up from a low chair without help at 78. His story is not unique. The problem is not the act of walking itself. The problem is what happens to the human machine after 75. Your nervous system begins to slow its electrical signals, your stabilizer fibers physically shrink, and your fast-twitch muscle response, the very thing that allows you to catch yourself when you trip, weakens to the point of silence. Your joints lose their power and their lubrication because walking does not provide the specific mechanical stress required to keep them alive. Recently, clinical researchers identified 5 specific movements that do what walking cannot. These exercises activate deep joint stabilizers, rebuild the lost muscle fibers that have been dormant for years, and reawaken the reflex pathways that have gone dark. The data is staggering. These movements can cut the risk of a life-altering fall by up to 98%. These are the exercises the wellness industry refuses to promote. Why? Because they require no expensive equipment, no monthly memberships, and no products to sell. They are based on the raw biology of the human frame, the same biology that Harvard and top institutes in Japan and South Korea have been studying to unlock the secret of longevity. One of these exercises, in particular, the second one on my list, stunned the scientific community. We saw seniors over 80 years old who practiced this single movement improve their lower body stability by nearly 99% in just 14 days. It was a result so dramatic, so sudden, that several corporations tried to bury the findings because it threatened their sales of walkers and canes. But I cannot stay quiet anymore. I have seen too many good people lose their independence because they were following the wrong map. In this journey we are taking together, I am finally exposing the top 5 exercises that every senior over 75 must do instead of relying on the false security of walking. We will rank them from the eye-opening to the absolutely critical. This is about more than just muscle. It is about the right to live in your own home, to cook your own meals, and to walk through your twilight years with a spine made of steel rather than glass. I want to know where you are watching from today, because every comment you leave is a testament to a generation that refuses to be forgotten. I am replying to everyone because we are in this together. Now, let us begin with exercise number 5, the one that quietly strengthens a hidden muscle group that the trillion-dollar industry hopes you never discover. This is your rebirth. This is your path back to the strength you thought was gone forever. I often think back to a rainy Tuesday in my clinic when Margaret Miller first sat across from me. At 78 years old, Margaret was a retired librarian from Portland, Oregon, a woman who had spent her life surrounded by the quiet wisdom of books, yet she felt her own story was reaching a tragic, premature end. I remember the way she looked down at her hands, her shoulders slumped in a posture of defeat that no medicine could cure. She didn't come to me for a prescription. She came because she had lost the one thing that gave her life meaning. With tears shimmering in her eyes, she told me about her 3-year-old grandson, Leo. A few weeks prior, Leo had reached up to her, his small face full of expectation, asking to be held. Margaret had tried, but her shoulders, weakened by years of inactivity and the deceptive promise that walking was enough, had simply given out. The sharp, white-hot flash of pain and the terrifying realization of her own frailty had forced her to set him back down. She felt like a failure, a grandmother who was becoming a ghost in her own family. The wellness industry had already failed her. They had sold her expensive cooling gels and told her that her rotator cuff pain was just an inevitable part of aging. They wanted her to accept a life of limitations. But I saw a spark of defiance in her. I told her that day that we were going to build an invisible shield around her joints. We weren't going to the gym, we were going to her kitchen wall. I introduced her to the wall push-up, perhaps the most underrated and safest upper body strengthener for anyone crossing the threshold of 75. When you perform a wall push-up, you aren't just pushing, you are engaging over 30 different muscle groups simultaneously. You are waking up the rotator cuff muscles that keep the humerus bone seated perfectly in its socket. And you are strengthening the tiny, intricate stabilizer muscles in the wrists that most people never value until they are too weak to turn a doorknob. I guided Margaret to stand about an arm's length from the wall, her feet hip-width apart, creating a straight line from her head to her heels, a pillar of potential strength. I told her the secret that the fitness magazines never mention: the magic happens in the lowering. As she leaned forward, bending her elbows to bring her chest toward the wall, I asked her to take a full 2 seconds. This is what we call the eccentric phase. Research from the American College of Sports Medicine has proven that this controlled lowering phase triggers a muscle-building response 3 times more powerful than the pushing phase itself. For a woman like Margaret, whose muscle fibers were thinning, this was the biological key to her cage. We started her almost upright, but as the days turned into weeks, she increased the angle, eventually moving to her sturdy oak countertop. The science behind this is undeniable. Dr. Sarah Martinez at Yale's Department of Orthopedics conducted a study finding that seniors who performed these wall push-ups 3 times per week increased their wrist bone density by 4% in just 6 months. That sounds like a small number until you realize that the average person over 70 loses that exact amount of bone mass every single year. Margaret wasn't just getting stronger, she was literally reversing the clock on her skeletal decay. I told her to do these in the morning, before the world got loud and before she ate her breakfast. Exercising in a fasted state can increase muscle protein synthesis by up to 35%, turning her morning routine into a potent dose of medicine. Months later, Margaret sent me a photo. She wasn't at the library. She was in a park, holding Leo high above her head, her face beaming with the radiance of a woman who had reclaimed her dignity. She had moved from a state of silent suffering to a place of vibrant strength, all by using the very walls that once felt like they were closing in on her. There is a profound, almost spiritual intersection between biology and timing that most medical practitioners forget to mention. In my 30 years of surgery, I have learned that healing is not just about what you do, but exactly when you do it. I tell my patients that the human body is like a finely tuned orchestra, and the conductor is the sun. When you wake up after 75, your body is at a crossroads. Your growth hormones and testosterone levels, those precious chemical messengers of repair and vitality, reach their natural peak in the early hours of the morning. This is the golden window of opportunity. If you spend this time sitting in a recliner with a cup of coffee, that hormonal surge is wasted. But if you feed those hormones with the right movement, you trigger a cascade of rejuvenation that can last for 48 hours. I often speak to my students about the concept of exercising in a fasted state. It sounds counterintuitive to many, especially in a culture that insists breakfast is the most important meal of the day. However, for the aging body, performing these targeted movements before your first meal is a revolutionary act. When your insulin levels are low, your body is forced to become more efficient at utilizing protein to repair muscle tissue.
Clinical data shows that muscle protein synthesis, the very process of rebuilding what time has taken away, is boosted by 35% when we move before we eat. It is as if the body, sensing the challenge, reaches deeper into its reserves to ensure survival. We are not just burning calories, we are signaling to the very core of our DNA that we are still active, still relevant, and still in the fight.
This morning ritual is the antithesis of the trillion-dollar industry's approach. They want you to believe you need a complex array of supplements and pre-workout drinks to be healthy. They want you to believe that health is something you buy in a bottle. But I have seen the laboratory results of those who simply follow the sun. By aligning your movement with your natural circadian rhythms, you are tapping into a pharmacy that is already inside you. You are utilizing the mechanical stress of movement to tell your bones to deposit calcium, rather than letting it leach away into your bloodstream. It is a slow, steady process of accumulation.
I remember a retired professor who told me that this realization changed his entire perspective on aging. He no longer saw himself as a fading shadow, but as a biological system capable of optimization. He began his wall push-ups at 7 in the morning, watching the light hit the trees in his backyard. He felt the surge of growth hormone not as a clinical statistic, but as a warmth in his muscles and a clarity in his mind. This is the secret of the morning strength. It is about seizing the day at its biological root. When we respect the chemistry of the morning, we are no longer just fighting against the inevitable decline. We are partnering with the natural intelligence of our bodies to create a version of ourselves that is resilient, capable, and profoundly alive. This is where the true medicine begins, not in a lab, but in the quiet, disciplined moments of a new day.
In the heart of Chicago, where the wind can cut through you like a knife, I met Artie Jones. Artie was 82 years old, a retired mail carrier who had walked thousands of miles through snow and heat, delivering letters to every corner of the city. But by the time he reached my office, his gait was a painful shuffle. His knees were a disaster zone of bone-on-bone osteoarthritis. The walking industry had already sold him the best shoes, the most expensive insoles, and enough joint supplements to fill a mailbox, yet he was in more pain than ever. To the world, Artie was just an old man whose knees had worn out. To me, he was a man losing his freedom. Artie told me he was terrified of the nursing home. He had seen his friends go in and never come out, and he felt his autonomy slipping away with every agonizing step.
I sat Artie down and explained a truth that the orthotics companies hate. His knees weren't actually the problem. The problem was that his quadriceps, the 4 massive muscles on the front of his thighs, had shriveled into thin ribbons. I told him, Artie, these muscles are your body's primary shock absorbers. When they are strong, they take the impact of your weight. When they are weak, that impact goes straight into your bone, grinding your joints into dust. After 75, these muscles shrink at a rate of 1.5% every single year if you only walk. Walking simply does not provide the resistance needed to keep them robust. I handed him a simple red resistance band that cost less than a sandwich and showed him the seated leg extension.
We sat in a sturdy chair, looped the band around his ankle, and I told him to slowly straighten his leg. Feel that burn, Artie? That's the sound of your muscles waking up from a decade-long nap. I instructed him to hold that extension for 2 full seconds, feeling the quadriceps tighten and lift the kneecap away from the joint. This creates space and reduces friction. Then I told him to take 3 seconds to lower it. The return is where the strength is built. The Arthritis Foundation has published research showing that strengthening these specific muscles can reduce knee pain by 47%, a result better than many surgical interventions. Artie practiced this every other day. He wasn't just doing reps, he was rebuilding his suspension system. The beauty of the resistance band is that it provides variable resistance, meaning it gets harder as you extend, perfectly matching the strength curve of the muscle. This is scientifically superior to heavy weight machines because it forces the smaller stabilizer muscles to fire as well. After just 8 weeks, Artie didn't need his cane to get to the mailbox. He came back to see me, standing taller, his Chicago accent booming with a new confidence. He had increased his leg strength by 32% according to our clinical measurements, a feat that traditional weight training often fails to achieve in seniors. Artie wasn't a patient anymore. He was a man who had reclaimed his ability to navigate his city, proving that even at 82, you can build a set of shock absorbers that can carry you through the rest of your life. While the morning is the time for hormonal priming, the afternoon offers a different kind of biological gift. As an orthopedic surgeon, I have spent a lifetime studying the mechanics of injury, and I have found a remarkable pattern. The risk of soft tissue tears and joint strains drops significantly in the late afternoon.
Between the hours of 2 and 5 in the afternoon, your core body temperature reaches its natural daily peak. This isn't just a number on a thermometer. It means your muscles are more elastic, your joint fluid is more viscous and lubricating, and your nervous system is at its most coordinated. I call this the safety zone for resistance training. I often think about the thousands of seniors who are told to do their exercises whenever they have time. This is well-meaning but misguided advice. If you perform resistance movements like the leg extensions Artie did when your body is cold and your nerves are still sluggish, you are essentially trying to stretch a cold rubber band. But in the afternoon, your body is primed for adaptation. Research from the International Journal of Sports Medicine has revealed that strength gains are actually 15% higher when training occurs during this window. Furthermore, the risk of injury is reduced by 26%. For a 75-year-old, that 26% is the difference between a successful workout and a torn ligament that leads to a hospital bed. I encourage my patients to view this afternoon session as a second awakening. It is a time to reconnect with the physical self after the sedentary hours of the midday. When your body is warm, your muscles can handle a greater load, which is the only way to trigger the growth of new muscle fibers. We are not just going through the motions. We are looking for that specific burn that signals the muscle is being challenged. Without that challenge, there is no change. This is why the trillion-dollar walking industry is so dangerous. It offers the illusion of exercise without the necessary stimulus for growth. I have watched patients who were previously prone to small pulls and aches transform simply by shifting their resistance work to the afternoon. They find they can push a little further, hold the tension a little longer, and recover much faster. It is about working with the grain of your biology rather than against it. When you align your effort with your body's natural peak, you are maximizing every minute of work. This is the science of efficiency. We are building a body that is not just strong, but resilient and flexible. As the sun begins its slow descent, you are reaching your physical peak, proving that aging is not a process of fading away, but a process of constant rhythmic renewal.
In the moss-draped beauty of Savannah, Georgia, I met Eleanor Riggs. Eleanor was 75, a retired piano teacher whose fingers could still play a flawless Chopin nocturne, but whose feet were failing her. She lived in a house filled with memories and the heavy silence left by her husband, who had passed away a year earlier following a devastating hip fracture caused by a simple slip in the kitchen. Eleanor was haunted by that fall. She lived in a state of constant low-level terror, what I call the ghost of the fall. She had begun to avoid walking on certain rugs. She gripped the furniture as she moved from room to room. Her world was shrinking because her GPS, her proprioceptive system, was dying. Every decade after 75, we lose 40% of the neurons that tell our brain where our feet are in space.
When Eleanor came to me, she was experiencing what she called the stumbles. She wasn't falling yet, but she felt like she was constantly on the edge of a cliff. I didn't tell her to walk more. I told her she needed to reprogram her brain. I introduced her to a modified Tai Chi balance flow. This isn't just exercise. It is a neurological rescue mission. Unlike walking, which is a repetitive, linear motion that requires very little brain power, Tai Chi forces the brain to communicate with the vestibular system in the inner ear and the visual tracking system simultaneously. We started with the weight shift, where Eleanor stood with her feet shoulder-width apart, slowly moving her center of gravity from one leg to the other. To an outsider, it looks like she's doing nothing, but inside her nervous system, millions of neurons were firing like a lightning storm, rebuilding the pathways that walking ignores. Then, we moved to the heel-to-toe walk. I asked her to imagine she was walking on a tightrope across her living room floor. Each step was a deliberate, slow-motion calculation. This forces the brain to make micro-adjustments in the stabilizer muscles of the ankles and hips. Harvard Medical School has conducted extensive studies showing that this kind of mindful movement reduces the risk of falls by 45%. For Eleanor, this was the medicine she needed. She wasn't just strengthening her legs, she was exercising the fear that had kept her prisoner. We added the single leg stand with arm movements, where she would lift one knee and move her arms in slow, flowing circles. It was a dance of defiance against gravity.
The key, I told her, was speed, or rather the lack of it. By moving at 25% of her normal speed, she was forcing her brain to maintain conscious control over movements that had become sloppy and automatic. A study of 3,000 seniors found that those who practiced this improved their reaction time by 37%. That is the difference between tripping and catching yourself. Eleanor told me that after 6 months, the ghost in her house had vanished. She could walk through her kitchen without looking at her feet. She was playing the piano again, her music a reflection of the newfound harmony in her body. She had moved from a state of paralysis to a state of grace, proving that the brain remains plastic and capable of learning balance even in the shadow of 75.
As Eleanor and I worked on her balance, I realized that many people forget the most vital component of any movement, the breath. In the high-pressure world of orthopedic surgery, I have seen how the way a person breathes can dictate their recovery. For the senior over 75, breathing is not just about oxygen, it is about managing the nervous system. When we feel unstable or weak, our natural instinct is to hold our breath, which spikes our blood pressure and sends a signal of panic to the brain. This panic causes the muscles to stiffen, making a fall even more likely. I taught Eleanor the breath of longevity, a simple 4-4-4 rhythm.
I asked her to inhale deeply through her nose for 4 counts as she expanded her arms, hold for 4 counts, and then exhale through her mouth for 4 counts as she moved back to center. This isn't just relaxing, it is a physiological override. This specific pattern activates the vagus nerve, which triggers the parasympathetic nervous system, the body's rest and digest mode. Professor Li Wei from the Institute of Geriatric Medicine in Beijing discovered that this rhythmic breathing can lower systolic blood pressure by an average of 12 points. For a senior, that is a massive cardiovascular benefit that walking alone can never achieve. More importantly, this breathing pattern increases oxygen delivery to the brain by 20%. When you are performing complex balance movements like the Tai Chi flow, your brain is hungry for that oxygen. It needs it to process the millions of signals coming from the feet and the inner ear. I watched Eleanor's face change as she mastered this. The tension in her jaw melted away. Her movements became more fluid, more connected. She wasn't just moving her body, she was oxygenating her recovery. I tell all my patients to practice this breathing even when they aren't exercising. It is a tool they carry with them everywhere. If they feel a moment of dizziness or a spike of anxiety, the 4-4-4 breath is their anchor. It turns the panic of aging into the peace of presence. We are training the brain to stay calm when the body is challenged. This is the hidden architecture of resilience. When you combine the right movement with the right breath, you aren't just a senior doing exercises. You are a human being reclaiming the full capacity of your biological heritage. You are breathing your way back to a steady, confident life.
In the industrial shadow of Detroit, Michigan, I met Frank Henderson. At 85, Frank was a man who had spent 40 years on a factory floor, his body a testament to hard work and heavy lifting. But Frank had a secret fear that made him feel small: advanced osteoporosis. His spine was curving, and his hip bones had become so porous that his doctor told him he was one bad step away from a wheelchair. Frank felt like he was made of thin glass. He had been told to walk carefully, but that advice only made him more sedentary, which in turn made his bones even weaker. It was a death spiral of inactivity. The medical industry wanted to put him on heavy medications with side effects like jaw necrosis, but Frank wanted a different way.
I looked Frank in the eyes and told him, "Frank, your bones are alive. They are not dead rocks. They are dynamic tissues that respond to impact. We are going to use gravity to rebuild you." I introduced him to the heel drop. This is a movement so powerful that NASA uses it to prevent the catastrophic bone loss that astronauts experience in space. I had Frank stand tall, rise up onto his toes, and then, with a firm, jarring motion, drop his heels back to the hardwood floor. I want you to feel that vibration travel all the way up to your skull, Frank. That is the sound of your bones waking up. The science here is fascinating. When your heels hit the floor with force, it creates what we call a piezoelectric effect. The microscopic compression in the bone tissue creates a tiny electrical charge that signals the osteoblasts, the bone-building cells, to start depositing new calcium. Research from the University of Bristol has shown that this simple impact can increase bone density by 7% in just 12 weeks. For an 85-year-old, a 7% increase is not just a statistic, it is a life insurance policy. We targeted 50 drops a day, 1 every 2 seconds, to allow the shockwave to dissipate.
Frank was skeptical at first. He had been told his whole life to be gentle with his joints. But I explained that the impact of a heel drop is actually 3 to 4 times your body weight, exactly what is needed to trigger remodeling, yet perfectly safe for someone without a current fracture. Dr. Robert Chen at Stanford's Bone Health Clinic found that seniors who did this daily increased their hip bone density more than those on prescription meds. Frank did his drops every mid-morning on his kitchen's hard tile. He coupled this with 2,000 units of vitamin D to give his body the raw materials it needed. After 3 months, Frank's follow-up scan showed a reversal of his bone loss. He wasn't a glass statue anymore. He was a man who had literally used the earth to harden his frame, proving that even at 85, your skeleton is still listening to the signals you send it.
Dorothy Vaughan was the soul of her church choir in Austin, Texas. At 80, she had a voice that could bring the congregation to tears, but she had a secret shame. She could no longer stand for the duration of the Hallelujah chorus. Her legs would begin to shake, her lower back would ache, and she would have to sit down, feeling like she was failing her faith and her community. Dorothy had sarcopenia, the clinical term for the devastating loss of muscle mass that accompanies aging. The wellness industry told her to buy a walker with a seat, but Dorothy didn't want a seat. She wanted to stand. She wanted to sing. I told Dorothy that we were going to find her fountain of youth in a movement that humans have practiced for 1,000,000 years, the deep squat, but we weren't going to do it unsupported. I had her stand in front of a sturdy doorframe, gripping the sides for balance. I told her to push her hams back and lower herself as if sitting in a low chair, going down until her hips were below her knees. This is where the magic happens, Dorothy. This deep position is where your body releases the hormones of your youth. When you hold a deep squat, you engage all 640 muscles in your lower body and your core simultaneously. The University of California calls this the fountain of youth response because the metabolic demand of holding a deep squat triggers a massive 200% increase in growth hormone and a 45% increase in testosterone. These are the chemicals that repair tissue, burn fat, and keep the brain sharp. I had Dorothy hold this position for 60 seconds, breathing through the 4-4-4 rhythm. I told her to feel the quiver in her thighs. That quiver is the sound of your mitochondria, the power plants of your cells, multiplying to meet the demand. The University of Tokyo found that seniors who practiced this maintained 95% of their muscle mass over 5 years, while those who only walked lost 15%. Dorothy was diligent. She did 5 sets of these extended hold squats every late afternoon. She started by gripping the doorframe tightly, but eventually she was only using her fingertips. She was decompressing her spine, stretching her tight hip flexors, and pumping blood back to her vital organs. At the next Christmas service, Dorothy didn't just stand for the solo. She stood for the entire hour-long concert, her voice stronger and clearer than it had been in years. She told me she felt reconnected to the earth. The Mayo Clinic has found that the ability to perform a deep squat is a 94% accurate predictor of whether a senior will still be living independently 5 years later. Dorothy had secured her future. She wasn't just a singer anymore. She was a woman who had reclaimed her biological throne. As I sit here in the quiet of my office reflecting on the journeys of Margaret, Artie, Eleanor, Frank, and Dorothy, I am struck by a single powerful truth. The human body does not have an expiration date for strength. For 30 years, I have seen the damage caused by the trillion-dollar silence, the industry that profits from your frailty and sells you the lie that walking is enough. I have seen 30,000 patients, and I can tell you with the absolute certainty of a surgeon, you are not a victim of your age. You are a victim of the stimulus you have or haven't given your body. These 5 exercises, the wall push-ups, the resistance band leg extensions, the Tai Chi balance flow, the heel drops, and the supported deep squats, are not just a workout. They are a manifesto for a new way of aging. They address the 40% of your muscles that walking ignores. They rebuild the bone density that medications struggle to maintain. They reprogram the brain to find its center, and they ignite the hormones that keep your spirit young. We have seen how Margaret reclaimed her ability to hold her grandson, how Artie saved his knees, and how Dorothy found the strength to sing again. This is the harvest of resilience. It is the result of choosing the path of targeted, intentional movement over the path of passive decline. My final advice to you is simple but urgent. Do not wait for a fall to realize you are fragile. Do not wait for a diagnosis to start building your shield. Your body is listening to you right now. If you give it the gentle path of walking alone, it will continue to shrink.
But if you give it the challenge of these 5 movements, it will respond with a strength you thought was lost decades ago. Consistency is your only requirement. Perfect form is your only guide. Progressively increasing the challenge is your only goal. You have the power to stay in your home, to keep your independence, and to live your golden years without the shadow of fear. I have dedicated my life to this mission because I believe that every senior deserves to be strong, injury-free, and independent. But I cannot reach everyone alone. I need you to join this movement. If these stories and these sciences have touched your heart or given you hope, I ask you to act now. Hit that subscribe button below and join our community of resilient souls. Share this message with a friend, a neighbor, or a loved one who has been told that they are too old to be strong. Your support helps us spread this vital, life-saving information to the millions of seniors who have been left behind by the wellness industry. Let us show the world that after 75, we are not fading away. We are just getting started. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next chapter of our journey towards strength.